Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
Oh, yeah, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. That mic is hot, and it's hot times to talk about the National Football League and fantasy football. It's time for the Audible Live every Thursday night. 2 hours of fantastic talk. Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman, talking about the National Football League, and, of course, this little thing we call fantasy football as well. As training camps have kicked off, they are underway, and we are very, very excited to jump right in and to talk about it. Now, before we get to the football, we do, and I sound like Betty White there, the Twitter. Before we get to the football, I've wanted to send out a heartfelt thanks to the many hundreds of emails and tweets and everything that I had received this last week. Of course, last week going to see The Dark Knight Rises for midnight premiere, was not in Aurora, and, the tragedy in Aurora, Colorado, certainly on the hearts and minds of moviegoers, of Batman fans, and of this country. And I will say this, being in this state my entire life, Colorado will rise, and this community, the Aurora community, will rise. The Mile High City will rise from this tragedy, and it shows the great strength and character of the local media who have covered this event and this tragic happening at the Aurora Theater during the midnight premiere for The Dark Knight Rises. It shows what a great community we've built, because so many, Bloom, I'll throw it to you, and Matt, I want to hear your thoughts as well, having relatives out in Aurora. Bloom, it just shows the great community that we have. This relationship we have with our listeners. We always say thank you. We always say, we love you guys. And it's the truth. And this relationship that we have with listeners really shows through when something like this happens. And, I get a lot of emails and tweets like, hey, are you okay? And, I certainly appreciate the thoughts and concerns. And I appreciate the love and positive energy that has been, put toward the victims and their families and their friends during this tragic time, Bloom.
Yeah, and there are a lot of ways people can show their support for the victims and their families. I know there's a Jessica Redfield scholarship fund. I know one of the victims, Caleb Medley. There's a fund set up for his medical bills. He was uninsured. So there's a lot of ways you can help out. But just like you said, bringing it back to our community and just community in general, it's one of the great things about football season starting up and training camp starting up isn't just football. And believe me, we'll stick our finger in the light socket and get our buzz off of that tonight. But this community, and I get emails, Twitters, Facebook messages from people, and they're not just about football, not just about your fantasy football teams, and it's fantastic, and I feel like a much richer person to have all of you in my life, and I know we've gone through some stuff together just earlier this year, and I think that, we could all say that, getting into this to hear the sound of our own voices and talk about football, which we love, and we've ended up getting a lot more out of it.
Certainly, and Matt, well, and speaking of the Aurora community and just the heart and determination that this city is showing in the events afterwards.
Yeah, certainly, and it's really more of a statement about our country as a whole, and really the world as a whole. When you look at human nature, and one of those positive things about human nature is, you look at the country giving back and trying to do what they can to make things easier for, a situation that there really is no easy answer for. And, one of those things that I would like to highlight is I'm just thankful for the fact that in light of last week, we're talking about all the arrests of players, that there is still, far and wide, the great majority of players in the NFL are really do-gooders, smart guys, mature people, have learned lessons, just like everybody else. And, looking at the news and seeing something from like Doug Farrar on Yahoo writing about Steve Smith donating $100,000 towards the Aurora community for, helping out the victims, that's the kind of news that isn't often publicized as much as you would think. And it's nice to be able to see that kind of thing. So kudos to Steve Smith and to the rest of the football players who visited visited the victims, who have helped out with their money and their time and continue to do with causes around this country and around the world.
Well, and arrest rate per capita lower in the NFL than it is in society. So, I always say microcosm of society. Well, actually, football players aren't getting arrested as much. And one thing that we had talked about earlier this week, Matt, is, football players aren't Neanderthals. Football players, and obviously in every occupation, you have a job out there, and I don't care if you're a Fortune 500 company or a landscaper, you work with some idiots, okay? So obviously in the NFL, there's some idiots. But for the most part, we're talking about guys who are educated, sensitive, and really, have the right mindset about things. So we'll continue on from that discussion. It is time for some talk about training camps opening up around the National Football League, and I, for one, am so very excited. Bloom, I'm so excited that I got heat stroke today.
Ooh.
I'm standing out at Dove Valley watching the Denver Broncos practice, but, buddy, I'll be there tomorrow as well. I'm ready.
Ooh. Yeah, stay hydrated, Cecil. But, there's a lot. I think a lot of people got a bit of the vapors watching Peyton Manning today. I know the reports have been good, and I also got to bring up, and we're not going to make this a Denver Broncos show, okay? But I did see our old friend Bill Williamson talking about that the Broncos might be giving this young running back, Donnie something, you're going to give him a chance to shine, I hear.
Yeah, Ronnie Hillman going to get that chance to shine. We do have a lot to talk about as it pertains to Peyton Manning and the way that he looked today, which was very good. Talking to Jason Cole today as he was out at training camp, we talked about Manning's deep arm, and really it comes down, and Matt, this is where I want you to jump in, because we talk about a quarterback skill set, and we all watch the footwork, and, by the way, Brock Osweiler's footwork still looks clean, and I'm telling you, Bloom, he looks like a different guy, so we'll see if he keeps that up in the preseason. The point is this, and Matt, I want to hear your thoughts on this, and watching as much film as you do. You look at these quarterbacks. For me, it's how tightly they spin the pass. It's velocity. Velocity is more important than downfield arm strength. Now, he didn't overthrow Demaryius Thomas on a 9 route today, but he did take a few deep shots, not a ton, and he didn't throw that comeback, that 25-yard comeback towards the sideline, especially on the opposite side of the field. That's probably the most difficult throw in football. I'd like to see that. We have not seen that yet, but we did see some 9 routes, some deeper passes, some out routes, plenty of zip, plenty of velocity, and fitting it into tight spaces. One thing that Tim Tebow never did and will likely fail to do in his pro career is throwing into tight windows. And that's why Eric Decker, I always talk about him not getting separation. He worked one-on-one against Champ Bailey today, and Bailey's not the same player that he used to be, but still one of the best in the league, in my opinion, top 10 cornerback. Decker would get a slight little sliver of daylight. Manning fit it in. Manning stuffed that football in. And that's the main difference, because that's a pass where Timmy, if he saw that, which was a question, if he saw it, he wouldn't throw it because he wasn't wide open. Now it makes plays for Bubba Caldwell, who was the star of practice today. Perhaps we're overlooking his role and what could be his role in this offense. But you see Peyton Manning out there. For me, in watching and evaluating young quarterbacks, or old quarterbacks in this case, Matt, I want to see that velocity, because a tighter spun pass will travel better, will have better trajectory. We always talk about the nose of the football needs to be coming down when it comes towards the receiver. Nothing pisses me off more than a pass where the nose of the football's up when it's coming in. You should not see that, college, pro, what have you, although we still see it sometimes. But with Manning, with the proper velocity today, was the positive sign. Not the, 50-yard bomb, Matt. It doesn't show me much. What shows me much is the ability to have the touch on the underneath routes and to spin that sucker tightly.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, Cecil, about the arm strength at this point. Really, when you're taking a look at a player at the quarterback position, one of the things that you should be looking at in addition to velocity is anticipation and hyper-accuracy. And certainly, velocity can be a big part of being hyper-accurate. It's a component of it to a certain degree, but anticipation is also that as well, especially on the deep ball, being able to read that. I've talked about it time and time again that Kerry Collins has a terrific arm, or he did during his career, and it was what made him a high-end prospect for a lot of reasons, or among many reasons, but he didn't have accurate deep ball, and he nearly killed Randy Moss in Oakland because of the fact that he does not have good anticipation on deep throws, and ends up hanging receivers out to dry because they have to wait on the football. Arm strength is overrated in that regard, and this is why when you look at somebody like Eric Decker, who isn't overly fast, but is big enough, physical enough, has good hands, and can take a hit and hang on to the football, that's what makes him valuable. That's what makes Steve Smith, when he was healthy with the Giants, that's what made him valuable with Eli Manning, because of the fact that he could take a hit and be able to come down with the ball, and they can make plays in the middle of the field and squeeze that ball in there. And that's what separates a lot of players who may not be the high-end, mouth-watering athlete that fans go gaga about, but necessarily aren't going to be the top players. Demaryius Thomas is going to have a fine season this year, and he will probably, in many leagues, outproduce Eric Decker, but I think it's closer than people think, because when you take a look at this very facet of the game, having somebody who has no fear to put the ball into a tight spot and having the trust in the guy to make the play, and that's what Decker offers Peyton Manning.
Well, one of the bigger stories that came across the wires today, Bloom, we don't spend a whole lot of time with defensive football on this podcast. IDP Roundtable is what that's all about. You got to check that out, of course, every week during the regular season right here on the Audible. We're more than just a live show. We've got plenty of shows during the season, about 230 last year, something like that, over 2 million downloads. Again, thanks, everyone, for listening. I did want to get your thoughts, because I like Brian Price. I've always liked Brian Price. When he came into the league, injuries and inconsistencies have kept him from playing up to his potential, and coming in after Gerald McCoy. When they got him that season, Brian Price was there. He's a guy now traded to the Chicago Bears, Rod Marinelli. If there's one guy that can make Price work out, it's Rod Marinelli. And Price and Barron going a little UFC? What's going on? Give us a scoop here. And, Bloom, are you as excited about Brian Price in Chicago as I am?
It's a good calculated risk, and you brought up the incident with Mark Barron, and perhaps that might have given a little nudge to Greg Schiano and Mark Dominic, the GM there, to move on from Price. And he's been through so much. He's lost 2 brothers. He lost a sister he was so close to. He's adopting his sister's 9- and 7-year-old kids. He had to take time away from the team because it really devastated him. And I can tell you from watching Brian Price, if he's healthy, and he's had a lot of, I think, hip and pelvis problems, but if he's healthy, he can be dominant. Like, no offensive lineman has a chance to stop him dominant. And you brought up Rod Marinelli, and if it's just about making your motor run hot, then Rod Marinelli, the coach that you want. Right? And if I can get my tongue untwisted there. But the point is, it's a good risk. It's probably, 5th, 6th, 7th round pick. They could use someone. You got Henry Melton, the former defensive end, former short yardage running back, actually, at UT. He's rushing the passer. He's more that penetrating under tackle. Price can penetrate, but also can hold the point of attack very well. If they can get good football out of him, this is a nice pickup. So you see Phil Emery, the new GM, taking a chance on Brandon Marshall, taking a chance on Brian Price. This should be very interesting.
Well, let's talk about a veteran wide receiver who's getting workout with the Seattle Seahawks. Matt, when you hear Braylon Edwards is going to get a sniff, and Roy Williams, in addition, with the Texans, what were your thoughts there?
That's my thoughts on both of those guys, actually. That's about it. Actually, we look at those guys. They're exactly the type of athletes I just referred to that people went nuts over early in their careers and maybe flashed some great skill in Braylon Edwards' case, but weren't willing to work at the game at the level that they should have. Look, Jay Cutler, time and time again last year, hit Roy Williams, right between the numbers on plays that Brandon Marshall's going to make, even if he's dropping passes early on in camp right now, which is, fine, whatever. He's proven it in game day that he's going to make the plays. Roy Williams didn't do that. After he, had his initial success with the Lions, he really hasn't been the player that he could have been since that point. And a lot of that is most likely effort. The same thing goes with Braylon Edwards. And you look at these guys, and certainly if they have their head on straight, if they have the the attitude to really want to prove themselves and show that they can be the player that their potential dictates, then certainly there's some fantasy value there for them. But we need to see that in camp. We need to see if they can make a team, stay on a team, and actually ascend up a depth chart. So if you're drafting right now, you look at these two players, and it's kind of like Chad Ochocinco. Talent, proven experience, veteran player, been around, maybe worth a very late round pick, but with very low expectation until you start to see a story build here that has some legs.
Well, let's talk about a trade earlier this week that maybe flew under the radar. And for fantasy purposes, it doesn't point to Louis Murphy doing it. Well, first, he's got to be healthy, Bloom, with the Carolina Panthers. Let's trade for a guy who can't play yet because I'm a hamstring. But Louis Murphy bounced. The reason why, and you know, we're doing the preseason watch list set to release next week. Make sure to stay tuned to the Audible for that. 32 teams, 32 episodes, every skill position player you want to talk about. We talk about them on those shows, team-by-team basis. We did the Raiders, so we obviously, in that show, talked about Jerron Kreiner. We've spent a lot of time with Kreiner on this show. Rod Streeter, though, a name that, deep Dynasty League owners need to know as well. So while the Murphy trade may not say a lot about him or the Carolina Panthers, get us, God, that guy's got to stay healthy, but it may say something about these young wide receivers and Jerron Kreiner and Rod Streeter.
Well, Kreiner's the one that you care about for your leagues this year. I really believe that Kreiner can pass Darius Hayward-Bay, be better at a similar kind of game size based on being able to block out smaller defensive backs. I think that Jerron Kreiner is one of the better late sleepers, especially if Denarius Moore can't stay healthy, speaking of can't stay healthy. And then Rod Streeter, he actually got the starts, first team snaps when Moore was out with a hamstring injury during the spring. So you knew they liked Streeter. These two guys emerged in a big way in the spring, allowed them to deal Murphy. As you said, Murphy is as much about a similar receiver to David Geddes, and Geddes starts out on the camp PUP, coming back from the ACL tear, so we'll see. And it's actually a hamstring that has him on the camp PUP. Those two guys might be competing for a number 3 job. I do think that that number 2 job is safely belonging to Brandon LaFell. But, it's one of those deals where you see, another thing you like to see about this is Marty Herney, Reggie McKenzie. These guys are on pretty good terms. They swapped Mike Goodson, Bruce Campbell. I have to assume that both teams were pretty happy with what they got because they made another deal. And then you saw Carolina turn around, basically recoup the conditional pick that they had gotten from Oakland for Murphy. that they gave up to Oakland for Murphy, and get one for Jeff Otah from the Jets. Of course, Otah didn't pass his physical. They got a week to do it. So, staying active, these little trades sometimes. We saw Ryan Grant change teams from the Giants to the Packers in a minor trade like this right before the season started. So they're worth watching.
Well, let's talk about the Cleveland Browns. And, Matt, I got to toss it to you. Not about their theater, as Bloom put it. I like that, by the way, Sigmund. It's Brandon Weeden, okay? Can the Browns stop effing around and just say it, okay? And this whole, we don't know. We're going to wait. It's Brandon Weeden. They want it to be Weeden, and if it's not Weeden, it's because he got hurt. That's the only way. I mean, he could literally suck in practice, and he'd still be handed the starting job. Colt McCoy may be traded, although in snooping around with the Denver Broncos, because, listen, Caleb Haney, not exactly a great option, and Brock Osweiler's a raw rookie. Snooping around with some Broncos sources doesn't sound like McCoy's on their radar. The point is this, Browns, please, stop the facade. Let's talk about Josh Gordon, though. Matt, how much of a concern is it that he did finally come clean about not being clean with that another failed drug test, the one that got him, that made his decision to leave Utah a hell of a lot easier?
Oh, I'm sure that other people, that the people that needed to know, knew that. The media didn't need to know that, and that's why it probably wasn't something that he talked about. But I'm sure the folks making the decisions in Cleveland were aware that he failed a third drug test, and it isn't that important at this point because he already failed two. Come on, folks. I mean, if you think that one more on top of that 2 years ago is, or even last year is an issue, then I mean, it's not. I mean, just look at what we have with the state of the NFL. But going back to your, come on about Brandon Weeden, Cecil, you just don't understand Cleveland fans. I'm sorry, you're a Broncos guy. You don't get Cleveland. And here's the thing. You got to understand that they have to put on this facade. Because if they don't, their luck in Cleveland will be that Brandon Whedon gets hurt, and then Colt McCoy ends up playing better than he ever did, and then they're going to have to eat humble pie, and they're not going to handle that well either. So really, this is one of those deals that they're trying to avoid the worst-case scenario, which is actually doing anything to put the football gods into a situation where the football gods laugh at them even more.
Matt, I have to ask you this then. Does Mike Holmgren know what the hell he's doing?
Man, I don't know, but you know what? All I care about is them doing what they need to do. I'm no expert on GMs and what their moves are, and don't have privy to information like that. Just like I would listen to somebody say that Warren Sapp doesn't know what he's doing as an analyst. All I know is he was a great football player. Sometimes people are right, sometimes people are wrong. Sometimes the organization that they inherit can be so messed up that even if you're the head of it, it can take a while to dig out of it. And I think that's my best guess with Cleveland, is that it's just been such a long period of dysfunction that even if you have expertise somewhere else and you bring it there, that it's still going to be a whole new problem for them that you've never encountered.
Well, speaking of digging out and coming back from behind, let's talk about this Mike Wallace situation, Bloom. Mike Tomlin coming out and saying, hey, I'm going to work with Emmanuel Sanders because he's here and I'm happy to do it. And Wallace playing this dangerous game. Does this thing get figured out quickly? Is this a non-issue, let's say 3 weeks into August? Or is this something that could creep around and linger and really affect Wallace's performance on the field? We know in that Todd Haley offense, listen, if it's not Wallace, it'll be Antonio Brown because that passing game is going to be very high-powered. Mike Adams, David DeCastro protecting Ben Roethlisberger better. That straightforward attack from Isaac Redman. I got a little pushback from some Steelers fans, fellow Steelers fans, by the way, who still mistakenly think I'm a Broncos fan, because I said Redman's a better option than Mendenhall. I firmly believe that because Redman's a straightforward guy. He's not a dance guy. He's going to take what's there. He's going to plow through arm tackles. He's not going to worry about juking people. He's just going to run your ass over. And with that improved offensive line, I like Redman's style better, especially with that Todd Haley passing game. But back to the Mike Wallace thing, Bloom. What are your overall thoughts? How does this thing turn out? Is Wallace really, hurting himself by staying away?
Yes, he's hurting himself by staying away. And if he stayed away for this long, it could get bad. Bus Cook is his agent, and Mike Wallace he just has it in his head that he deserves this money. And the thing is, you get this money when you're an unrestricted free agent, not a restricted free agent. Steelers have not reduced his $2+ million tender, even though they have the right to, like the move that the Chargers, A.J. Smith pulled on Vincent Jackson. So they're negotiating. Well, they're not negotiating now. I mean, he has to sign that tender. I think that the Steelers are ready to say, you're playing under that tender this year. We've talked all the talk we can talk about your future long-term contract. We'll pick it up again next year. The big problem for Wallace is the Rosetta Stone offense, and he's not there for the installation. He's got an offensive coordinator who's pretty well known for getting up in the grill of wide receivers when he doesn't like what they're doing. Wallace, still not the most polished route runner. A guy whose speed adds a lot to the Steelers' offense, but not the technician, not on the same page like Antonio Brown is with Ben Roethlisberger. You see Emmanuel Sanders now in Wallace's spot, getting those reps, getting the familiarity with that offense. Wallace's ADP right now is 4th round. Wouldn't go near him in the 4th round. Brown's going in the 6th, 7th round. He should have been going higher anyway, especially in PPR leagues. And you're looking at Sanders as an excellent late pick because if he took it this far, he may be willing to do something crazy. And the Steelers are not an organization that you want to get into a staring contest with. You are not going to win. The Steelers are a very disciplined organization. They have clarity. Whether they're right or wrong, they're not going to back off of these decisions. There's a long chain of players who tried to beat the Steelers in this kind of game, and it just doesn't work.
Very dangerous game for Mike Wallace. We'll see how that shakes out here as training camps continue and get fired up around the National Football League. You're listening to the Audible. Each and every Thursday night, we've got our 2-hour live show, but make sure you subscribe to our show on iTunes so you can check out all of our episodes, including the 2012 Beat Writer Tour, which has kicked off, where we talk to the best insiders and beat writers from each team in the NFL, well, except for Pittsburgh. Because Ed Bouchette's so hard to get a hold of. Bloom, there's one guy with Pittsburgh, okay? You go for Bouchette, and he's a little bit difficult to get a hold of. But most every team in the league, we talk to the best insiders on our Beat Writer Tour. Also, as I said earlier, the preseason watch list debuting Monday, okay? These episodes are going to have 32 episodes for you in about the course of 10 days, okay? Those episodes are going to go thoroughly through each team, every skill position player, deep dynasty prospects to keep an eye on. We're going to talk about all of them on the preseason watch list. Make sure to check that out. Make sure to subscribe to us on iTunes. It's free, and you get the show downloaded now with the cloud. By the way, because that was always the thing. People would be like, well, I got to plug in my here's how lazy we are. I got to plug in my iPhone to get the new podcast. Like, I got to plug in my iPod. I got to download. I got to sync my iPod to iTunes to get the new podcast. Well, now with the cloud, automatically, you can just get it onto your smartphone or to your web-enabled iPod. So no more bitching and complaining about having to run a cord to your electronic device. I'm Cecil Lammey. I like to complain sometimes, but I love football all the time. Let's get back to the football, and let's get to the Shark Pool, the message boards at footballguys.com. We want to get through all these great questions. This is the place. Follow the show on Twitter at The Audible, Sigmund Bloom at Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman at Matt Waldman, Cecil Lammey at Cecil Lammey. We make it easy for you. Listen, we want to get to these questions of the Shark Pool because very worthy of a lot of discussion. And starting with Rizzler's question, Matt, I'm throwing this one to you. Rizzler says he's tired of the ultra-biased responses on this topic in the Shark Pool. But he says, and he puts this in bold, so he's serious, Matt. What is the true value of Ben Tate, and what value does he represent at his current average draft position? This is in a redraft league. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I was actually just writing about Ben Tate this afternoon for an upcoming article, and one of the reasons being is that when I look at Tate and his skills and then look at the situation with the Texans, I mean, what I see is just a second coming of the Priest-Holmes-Larry Johnson tandem that we had from a few years back in Kansas City. And when you take a look at what you have here, Tate is, he's a physical runner. He's got great burst. He's shown more patience than I anticipated he would when he was at Auburn and Gus Malzahn's offense, where it was a little bit harder to see that. But at 706, which happens to be my area code and an ADP that's worthwhile for Ben Tate, I think that he's someone that you want to draft here. He represents good value, in my opinion, because, one, if you're going to take Arian Foster early, then he's the ultimate handcuff where he's capable of getting 1,000 yards in 8 games if he ends up being the guy because Foster gets hurt. If he doesn't get hurt, he's still someone that ends up getting enough carries and relief in games, especially if this team is going to run the ball as much as you would anticipate and they want to be able to keep Foster fresh for the playoffs. You're still going to get some opportunities there where I think that you have to look at him and say, Donald Brown, Ben Tate, who has more upside? C.J. Spiller, who has more upside with that? And I'd have to say that it's all pretty even there. And these are guys that are within the same round range in terms of ADP. Certainly Spiller and Brown are going to get more chances right away. Spiller's going to split time with Fred Jackson. Brown is the starter heading into camp. But when you look at what happens if their counterparts get hurt, when you look at all three of these scenarios, Tate's in the best scenario, best situation. And there are players being drafted later than Tate who are also going to be good starting value. So you don't have to worry about the fact that you're wasting a pick on a guy who may end up being a backup all season long, especially if you're looking at, say, an upside-down type of draft approach. Somebody like Tate, you're not worried so much about ADP at that point. What you're looking for is upside and talent. And Ben Tate represents that in the same way that maybe Jonathan Stewart would if D'Angelo Williams got hurt, or Peyton Hillis if Jamal Charles doesn't fully work out and has a setback and Hillis becomes the man, or they can actually run the ball 500 times like they say they want to in camp, which means it's going to be a 250 situation at best. And who are you going to give the ball to really in that situation? A scat back who I think is probably one of the most talented in the league, but coming off an ACL tear, or a tank? I think you're going to give at least 250 carries to the tank and maybe more, unless, of course, he has some sort of black ops assignment that occurs in week 3, and then he and, one of those cartoon characters on Fox have to foil some sort of, World Bank heist, So that's basically the scenario there when I take a look at Tate. Definitely worth the value at 706.
Damn, I want to get an Archer drop for this show. And when you mention Black Ops, you're not talking about Call of Duty. So let's move on from that. And the running back situation in Washington, we've got a question about that a little bit later in the show. Certainly, Shanahanigans, man, what did you expect, okay? Training camp kicks off. Did you expect it to be smooth? Did you expect it? And this is from a guy who has basically admitted and privately has made allusions to this. Mike Shanahan likes to essentially F with his running backs, okay? I remember Mike Bell years ago, Broncos show. Mike Bell years ago, he made him the starter. He named it training camp. You're top of the depth chart. Just to see how he'd react. Just to see how, this is Mike Bell, okay? Just to see how he'd respond and to see how the other backs behind him would respond. How does Tatum Bell take to that when he learns that he's not the top of the list? So that's what Shanahan does. So we will discuss the Royster and Halou and Hightower, and my head is hurting, and not because I was out in the sun too long with not enough agua. But we do want to touch on the Washington Redskins wide receiver situation. Bloom, Santana Moss in the slot, Pierre Garçon, and then Josh Morgan, and not Hankerson, although Hankerson out there, even though he has coming back from that hip. What are your thoughts on the Redskins wide receivers, Bloom?
Yeah, we got some great data points, and that's really what we're looking for as training camps open. What you're sifting through, we're learning about some injuries, some setbacks that guys had in the off season that we hadn't heard about until now when they don't practice their they don't pass their physicals, they don't get cleared off of the PUP list. We're also finding out about who is going to get those first team snaps in some of these training camp battles we're watching closely. And I think with Moss in the slot and Hankerson and Morgan are competing directly, but really all these guys are competing to be the number 2 wide receiver. Hankerson coming off of that hip surgery, he's back earlier than we expected. Morgan coming off of that broken leg, it seemed like he was coming along slow, but he was cleared, and he was the number 2 receiver this first practice, with Moss in the slot with the first team, Hankerson the number 4 receiver. Hankerson did have a nice breakout game, I believe, against Miami last year. Morgan, on the other hand, got paid $7.3 million guaranteed in a 2-year contract by Washington. So it's not backup money, really. Whoever it is going to have value. This is one to watch. So while Shanahan's messing with the running backs, we'll talk about that and even bring up some names that are going to make us tear even more hair out trying to track the situation. In the meantime, we have these 4 names to watch. And at the very least right now, it looks like Morgan's in the lead, and there are more reports today. Moss had actually maybe lost as much as 20 pounds, not even the 15 reported, definitely quicker, leaner than what they had seen last year. He talked about getting in shape starting in February instead of April. He had a nutritionist who's eating much better for the off season. So I'm still saying if I'm going to take any of these 3 today, and I have been taking them in the mock drafts I've been doing, Santana Moss.
Santana Moss, the old man, still capable of getting it done. We shall see if he, in fact, does that. Now, not necessarily a surprise, Matt, but Patriots cutting Joseph Adai. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, my first thought is when you asked about Call of Duty, there really is no Call of Duty because the only running back that can star in a show or a video game called Call of Duty is Najee Davenport, and he's retired. So, But when we talk
I thought
about,
you were going to say Dirty Dozen like Jim Brown thing, go with the military angle there.
No, I think Call of Duty, definitely fits Najee Davenport, and probably does fit at this point in terms of his game and his ability to want to stay healthy and practice and participate in games, is Joseph Adai, who I think it's kind of a shame, because when you look at him from his career at LSU, he was a tough back, certainly someone that you could count on in big game situations. He was clutch in a lot of ways, versatile player. But at this point in his career, he has not been able to stay on the field for the past 2 to 3 years. When he has performed, it seems like he gets hit and he's out and he's not staying into the game. And I think that the Patriots are kind of a team that is low on the BS meter. And I don't know the full situation with Joseph Adai. None of us really do, but my best guess is, based on what I've seen with him, over the past few years and what they just handled with Chad Johnson last year, I think they probably have low tolerance for just holding on to somebody who has shown talent in the past but isn't showing anything in the present.
And by the way, in talking to some people, the Broncos don't want Joseph Adai, okay? And after quitting the conditioning test report from CSN New England, Bloom, I don't care if it's the Colts or even the Eagles, when Adai was cut. And most of these cuts are failed physicals or injuries. Eric Page was cut by the Broncos because he shredded his ACL in this month after minicamp. So that's why you see these guys released. Adai, I don't care if it's the Eagles. I know it's not the Broncos. Hey, he's done, Bloom. He's done.
Yeah, he quit. He quit in the middle of the conditioning test. So it's a shame. It's a really steep decline. He's 29 years old. We're seeing a lot of running backs producing into their 30s. I really thought in the postseason that ended with the Colts losing to the Saints in the Super Bowl, he looked good. I thought he looked great, and that wasn't that long ago, 2.5 years ago. But now it appears that he doesn't really want to play football anymore.
Now I can say you don't take him in your fantasy draft.
Yeah.
And not during the breakout season for Joseph Adai when LSU were named. And hell, if Travis Henry wants to make a comeback, Adai will be out of football for a year, and then next year will be like he's sniffing around. Clinton Portis still sniffing around, okay? And nobody's exactly heated up the waiver wire to run and go get him. Let's go back to the Shark Pool, the message boards at footballguys.com. Stat Grubby. We love talking about all things football, Matt. Dynasty football, something we all three of us enjoy. He says, hi, guys. Even for the purposes of Dynasty, I am seeing Steven Jackson really getting knocked way down the ladder with guys like Gore and Turner. I saw Turner and Gore running slow last year and looking spent, but Jackson always looked powerful, fast, and dangerous when healthy. He keeps himself in great shape, and it seems like he could still put up 2 more top 10 seasons before he slows down. Is he falling too far in dynasty leagues, especially in PPR leagues? And Jackson, one of these players, and you know this very, very well, Matt, Jeff Fisher's going to run. He's going to run him into the ground. So if Jackson can stay healthy, it's nothing but good things. He's his Eddie George. And that's exactly what Fisher will do. He'll use them up. I don't care if it's a year or 2 years, but we know that Jackson is going to get a big, bulky workload. Why the fall? Why Jackson falling in dynasty leagues, redraft leagues, what have you?
Well, first of all, he's not Eddie George. He's Eddie George's adolescent dream, actually, because I like Eddie George a great deal, but he's certainly a way better player than Eddie George was, even when Eddie George was in his prime, and he was a terrific running back. Steven Jackson should have been a special back in this league, and if he were paired with a player like a coach like Jeff Fisher, we would probably be talking about him on par with Adrian Peterson. I really do believe that, because the burst that he has is specialist receiving skills, great power, and it's still there. We all see that. So it's a great question, why is his value dropping? But I think a lot of it has to do with just what we see with trends. People like to look at dynasty leagues in 2 to 3 year windows, and with a guy of Jackson's age, with the amount of games that he's played, with the amount of wear and tear that people like to project or look at based on his carries, they want to anticipate the fall before they have to, and lower his value in their eyes before having to deal with it with him on his team and then feeling like that they're stuck with him. And that's the mentality with this. Chase Stewart does a great job on his new blog, Football Perspective, and I would suggest taking a look at one of his blog posts about running backs and being at that stage where they're in their late 20s and they've had a number of carries, and how to really look and a statistical analysis of it. And really his advice is to look at these guys year to year. And as long as the guy looks good that, the previous year, count on to continue to look good this year, or, the following year after that. And I think with Jackson, Fisher's going to run him into the ground. And Jackson already was quoted to, the local media saying, look, I would be unhappy if Isaiah Pete is given a significant role in this offense. I am the guy. And I think he sees the fact that he could be what Eddie George had dreamed about being and actually was to a lesser extent with the Titans, and that was pretty damn good. So, looking at this, you have to understand that this year, to me, he's a lock as a top 15 player and probably a potential bargain. He's a guy I almost have labeled as an early round exception, even if you're upside down drafting as a guy to take. It's just that I don't feel comfortable enough with this Rams offense in terms of the passing game and the defense to feel exactly, that confident just yet. But my mind could be changed a little later on here. Dynasty leagues, though, year at a time, and because of that, his value is going to drop. But it does make him a bargain if you are a team that is playing for this year. You have that championship window open, you make a deal, you acquire that one or maybe two players who are going to be able to do something for you this year, maybe next, but you're really just counting on winning this year. If that's the case, then forget about what the rankings say. You take them, you make a deal for them, and you're happy about it.
Certainly some running backs out there that are getting overlooked in fantasy terms, either veterans that have been proven and people will wrongly assume that they're in the twilight of their career, or perhaps younger backs who, we're hearing about some competition. We've got a question about Donald Brown coming up, so we'll answer that in just a little bit. Bloom, can I rant? Can I get – I feel this – I don't want to go off half-cocked, okay, although I've done that several times on the show, but I feel a rant. But, Bloom, I feel like I need your permission because I don't want to interrupt the flow of the show.
No, please, rant away.
Okay. You sound so convincing. Stat monkeys, okay? I have a real big issue with you stat monkeys. Football – I'm almost cussing, so please forgive me, Joe, if I let something slip. I'll make sure it's not an F-bomb. Listen, in thinking about Steven Jackson, reflecting while Matt was breaking it down better than anybody else can, listen, you look at these young running backs, you look at these veteran backs, and certainly I remember when Steven Jackson came out of Oregon State, and what did we hear? What were the questions? You go back. And even, go back through the old draft magazines. You got your old Sporting News or Lindy sitting around, what have you, and you list the positive, negatives, what have you. The stat monkeys, though, making too much noise, really pissing me off, ticking me off, because they're throwing out the numbers. And with Steven Jackson, what was the number? First off, they talked about level of competition without watching the game, by the way. They would talk about Steven Jackson. Oh, Oregon State. Who the hell do they play? They don't play defense Pac-12. Are you kidding me? And then it was yards per carry was the stat that was consistently pointed to when talking about Steven Jackson, never looking at the skill set, never putting on the tape. And if you did, you didn't know what you were looking at. Because unless it's, in black and white on a piece of paper or on a computer screen, unless it's got digits to it, you just can't fathom how someone could perform better. Steven Jackson's career at Oregon State, I believe his yards per carry was about 4.1, maybe 4.2, somewhere around there. For a college back that's a yard low, most college backs, you get them around 5. You're worth something, you're getting about 5 yards a carry. College football defenses aren't as quick. You can get to the corner, et cetera, et cetera. But what really pisses me off, and looking back at the greats that we've seen from Steven Jackson, the heart, the soul, the fire, the determination, it was the fact that he's proven these people wrong that we tend to forget about. So I will caution anyone out there, when we look at backs today, and I don't care if it's a rookie running back, I don't care if it's a veteran back, please stop pointing solely to the numbers. Numbers are deceptive. Numbers tell a part of the story, but not the entire story, and they don't tell the most important part of the story. Look at the construct of the players around them. Look at the system that they're in, and look at their skill set. Can they do what their team wants them to do, and is the team capable of doing that? With a guy like Steven Jackson, it was always there. A guy like Marshall Faulk, it was always there. You saw it, and not just the 386 yards and 7 touchdowns against Pacific in his second game as a freshman at San Diego State. It was always there. You saw it because you watched the film, not just pointed to the numbers. Marshall Faulk's numbers declined every year he was in college. Now he's still, near 1,500 yards his junior season, but the point is this. Stat monkeys, please stop pointing to guys like Steven Jackson and look at it. Well, there it is. And this is a little more controlled rant. Still recovering, still drinking my water, no alcohol tonight. A little later. But my point is this. Please, for the love of God and all things holy, if you love football, take the time before you tweet, before you type, before you talk about this great game that we love. Take the time to watch it and learn a few things. Read Pat Kerwin's book. Take your eye off the ball. Know what you're looking at before you just throw out numbers. There's nothing more holy to an argument, speaking of all things holy, than just pointing solely to numbers with a prospect. Didn't work with Steven Jackson. Guys that point to it now, you've got to just stop. Do yourself a favor and stop. Bloom, rant over. Let's go to FDC Trumpet's question in the Shark Pool. And he talks about some rookies, tips for rookies in the Fantasy Football Players Championship in full swing this week. Tips for rookies to the format. Just rookies that you're expecting to do more, rookies to target. Bloom, we always talk about RG3. Is that where you would begin, and specifically in the FFPC format?
Well, I think actually he's talking about rookies in the FFPC system, but I'm always happy to talk rookies. First, I'll talk about the rookies to the system because I did the Pros versus Joes draft earlier this week, which is in the FFPC system. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, you get 1.5 points per reception. 2 wide receivers start, 2 running backs start, and 2 flexes start. So there's a lot of good tight end flexes. I think I ended up taking Gates in the 3rd and Fred Davis in the 7th. Because Fred Davis as a flex is going to be as good as a top 15 or top 20 wide receiver or top 15, top 20 running back. And that's really the main thing you're going to need to know is that tight ends are going to go earlier than you think. Maybe Graham Gronkowski are going to go in the 1st round about when you expect, but let's say you have an early 3rd round pick. If you like one out of Gates or Hernandez, Vernon Davis, take them there because by the time it gets back to you in the late 4th, you're not going to see many tight ends there, and you're going to see that squeeze go on. Quarterbacks will fall a little farther because of the double flex system. I think the tight end is the main thing. And if you can steal one of those tight ends, like a Fred Davis or maybe a little later a Brent Selleck, whoever it is that you like from that tier outside of the top 8, and get one of the top 8 to hold down your tight end position, I think it's a great strategy in the format.
Back to the Shark Pool, and this one is it's a double up here. Let's double up on this, Matt. In the best single season going forward in their career, Britt or Dez or Bebe, Demaryius Thomas, or Julio Jones. So Britt or Dez first, Matt, and then Demaryius Thomas or Julio, Matt, as well. Your thoughts on those 4 wideouts?
I think that you have to go with Dez in this case, mainly because Britt and the injured knees, a little bit more of an issue, and the guy just, I just don't. You combine the injury issue with the off-field issues, put them together, and that even outweighs what you have concerns about with Bryant. And I just think that this team, in terms of the Cowboys, are rallying around Bryant a little bit more. And you have to look at the fact that this team also has enough players around Bryant that he is going to draw single coverage. He's going to have more opportunities to succeed than I think that what you're going to see in the Titans system where they have to rely on him maybe a little bit more, but the health issue is enough that there's enough of a concern there. So to me, Bryant's the safer play, and then to me, Demaryius Thomas or Julio Jones. It's pretty even. I'd have to say I'm not gonna. I hate to give you an answer where it's even like that. I mean, my choice would probably be Demaryius Thomas, just because of the fact that I think that with Manning, he's going to see more. He's going to see a more efficient deep ball thrower than what you're going to see with Matt Ryan. And I just don't think that Matt Ryan is probably going to hook up with Jones well in the red zone. But I still think that with Roddy White on the other side there, also the fact that Ryan just doesn't throw the deep ball as well as Peyton Manning. And Manning, again, it isn't about arm strength. It's about anticipation, which Matt Ryan lacks. I think that you got to give Thomas just the slightest edge, unless you're then maybe in a PPR league, and then I think that maybe then Jones might get the slight edge.
We're getting to that dreaded point with Matt Ryan where I always talk about the book on a player. The book gets written on you in 3-4 years. Okay, we're getting to that point with Matt Ryan where you're seeing the flaws, and flaws aren't necessarily going away. Voodoo Rage chimes in next, and Bloom, this hits on a topic and kind of a trend that all three of us have been highlighting this year. He says, "Good evening, gentlemen. I'm curious with the talk about the NFL becoming a passing league. Are running backs really as devalued in fantasy as we might think? It seems like even if teams are throwing the ball a lot more, that ultimately the running back will still benefit greatly from increased red zone chances and increased receptions. Should we really be jumping ahead of this curve in the paradigm shift and start targeting elite quarterbacks and receivers in our drafts at the expense of running backs, or is the position still as much of a mainstay of fantasy football as it was in years past?" That one's from Voodoo Rage, talking about essentially, Bloom, the stud running back theory, which all three of us have proclaimed in standard leagues, is back. It is back because of the scarcity of the position and because of the depth at quarterback. When you can get Jay Cutler as the 15th quarterback off the board, that's crazy, okay? When you can get to Brandon Lloyd and Vincent Jackson, these guys are going off the board in the late teens, 20s sometimes in some leagues. Yeah, that's just crazy talk. You've got some value at both positions, and they're incredibly deep. So you're able to set yourself up nicely if you can get those elite running backs earlier in your draft. Bloom, your thoughts and your answer for our man Voodoo Rage.
Yeah, so Voodoo Rage checking in the chat room, and if you have the chance to listen to the show live on Thursday nights and you have a chance to come to the chat room, we always have a great time there, and we're always talking about something different in the chat room than we're talking about on the air. We're just talking about Jason Snelling in the chat room. I do want to, before I jump into Voodoo Rage's question, it's a very good question. There's a couple of things I want to touch on. I'm going to go rewind back really quick on Josh Gordon. I hate to disagree. Yeah, I hate to disagree with Matt Waldman. I do. But I'm a little bit worried about Josh Gordon admitting now that he failed a third drug test after he was vehement that he did not after the supplemental draft. He had nothing to gain by saying he didn't. You want to look for in these turn your life around cases someone who owns up to everything, who's truly contrite, and not admitting what you've done is a sign to me that maybe he's not contrite. But we'll see. Another thing real quick on Steven Jackson. He, according to Howard Balzer, longtime writer out of the St. Louis area, I think he was like president of the PFWA, said that Steven Jackson was on PFT Live and said he is talking or expects very likely to get a contract extension soon that will allow him to retire as a St. Louis Ram. So Isaiah P. dynasty owners, and really Steven Jackson dynasty owners, need to take stock of that when they're thinking about the values of these players. Now, Voodoo Rage's question, I think there's some things that are right here. Yes, it's becoming a passing league. And yes, running backs are becoming devalued around the league. I don't know that that devalues them in fantasy, because what it sets up is a situation where those few feature backs that are left, or even the backs that are 1As but are hyper-talented and can get a lot done with that less than a feature back workload, are worth even more. Running back scarcity is the term that I use to always describe it in my writing when we're talking about it on this show. Now, another trend along with the passing league trend is that running backs, some teams are going more to specialists. You can look at New England, Green Bay, and New Orleans as three good examples here now. Can it produce a good fantasy running back? In the case of New Orleans, you bet, maybe even two. In the case of New England, maybe one. In the case of Green Bay, I think the answer is zero. But the point is they're using these running backs as interchangeable parts. Maybe you have a different first string, I'm making air quotes, running back depending on the set, depending on the focus of the play. And that is where, again, it's causing running back scarcity. So as Cecil pointed out, quarterbacks, wide receivers, very deep. So we're not going to target elite quarterbacks and receivers because of the depth there, and we are going to target running backs early. So yes, it is still the mainstay. And I would add to what Cecil said, not even in standard leagues, in PPR leagues. And you've got to get your running backs. That gets Darren Sproles into another elite running back position for you. A guy like Jonathan Stewart becomes a lot more interesting there because he gives you that floor of 2, 3, 4 receptions most weeks. It changes the landscape. It makes a few guys more valuable, but still overall, running back is the toughest position in fantasy drafts this year.
Now, on this show, we have the fantastic and it's a fine line between trust me, honey, it won't get weird to it got weird, didn't it? That's hour 2 of our show, the Audible Live, Thursday nights. You can call into this show. Now, we've got some rules in place because some idiot started talking about slapping the salami. No call screener on this show. But 347-826-7620 is the phone number. Hit me up either in the chat room, send me a direct message, and let me know, hey, I'm on hold, here's my area code number, and we will get to your phone calls. 347-826-7620 as we go there right now to the 440, and it is Jared up next on the show. Jared, my man, thanks for holding, thanks for calling into the show, and thanks for jumping through our hoops because of that one idiot.
Hey, man, I appreciate it, guys. You know, it's been a couple months since I called. I didn't realize the debacle had transpired since I had last called. I'll jump through 1,000 hoops. You guys have been so good to me fantasy-wise. It doesn't matter.
Well,
hey,
thanks, brother. What's on your mind tonight?
Well, first of all, when the Josh Gordon story broke here in Cleveland, thanks to my Football Guy subscription, I was literally the subject matter expert calling in on the shows because nobody had anything on this guy. So I was more or less, regurgitating what you guys had said, but I was trying to add my own twist on it. And they were like, well, where are you getting this information? And, of course, I'm dropping the name Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman, Cecil Lammey, Football Guys.
Yeah.
And they were asking me who they were. So, hey, just so you guys know, you've got love here in Cleveland. I can't tell my friends in my league about you guys because you're my secret weapon, but...
Part of the course.
Yeah. Oh, and, man, he just dropped cell phone story. So we'll get Jared back on so we can get to his question again if you've got a thought and you want to talk to us. We love taking phone calls. Listen, whether it's Game Time Decision or whether it's here on the Audible Live, 347-826-7620 is that phone number. So we hope to get Jared back soon on the line. He's out driving around there in Seatown, one of those Browns fans we love to talk to, and some of the best fans out there, certainly. Again, 347-826-7620. We will go back to the Shark Pool. While we wait for Jared to call back in, we'll go back to the Shark Pool message boards at footballguys.com. Carl Eller's dead liver says, in a PPR Dynasty League, what would be equal value in trading Rashad Jennings to the Maurice Jones-Drew owner? Now, he's tempted to hold on to Jennings because he does have the skills to be a starting running back, and he's scheduled for unrestricted free agency in 2013. Given his free agency status, would it be better to hold on him tight, cash him in now, given the MJD holdout? Matt, I would imagine that answer depends on how desperate that MJD owner is at this current time, because I think all three of us can agree that Rashad Jennings could start for a lot of teams out there. He just happens to be behind one of the best in the league. Is hold the right move here? Or if you get one of these crazy outlandish deals, especially I was texting with the Jaguars guy, Matt, and I believe I shared this story with you. I shared it via Twitter. I said, give me an update on MJD. The guy texted me back, and he's like, check back in mid-August. That's how long this staring contest could go on. We'll see if it, in fact, does reach the point where it's a couple of weeks. But what's the real play here, Matt, for Carl Eller's dead liver? Is it holding on to Jennings, or is it asking for that king's ransom for one Rashad Jennings?
I think you ask for the king's ransom, but if you don't get it, then you hold on to him, because Jennings represents terrific value at the end of drafts right now, rounds 14, 15 later, where he's going to start to climb in leagues the longer that MJD holds out. And you may start to get a little bit more of an offer, but I think that what happens is the best case scenario for Jennings is that Maurice Jones-Drew holds out. He either holds out for most of the season, and then Jennings gets to play, and he flashes that skill that we've seen in him at Pittsburgh, at Liberty, and he ends up performing his way into getting a free agent contract elsewhere, and you can end up getting maybe a second-round pick for him, maybe even a first-round pick, depending on how well he does. I would say, realistically, you're looking at a second- or third-round pick in dynasty leagues, or a player who is a solid starter at, say, wide receiver, or an up-and-coming player, something of that nature. But if you get somebody who's desperate enough to give you a higher pick than that, then yeah, you take it right now, because Jennings, again, like most running backs, he's been in the league a while. He's not likely to have more than a couple of years of starter production if he moves on elsewhere, unless it becomes a Mike Turner type of situation, which is kind of rare for a player to move on to another team and have more than 2 years of high-end fantasy production. Now, Jennings has that type of potential, but with the number of running backs entering the league who are young, who are talented, still healthy enough to go, there's a reason why MJD is not getting his money right now in Jacksonville, and part of it is that thinking that I certainly agree with. As much as I like Maurice Jones-Drew, as much as I think he's a terrific player and probably has earned his money, when you're looking at the economics of the situation, he's an older player. He's had some knee issues. He may have a couple more great seasons. He may be like Curtis Martin and play until basically his hips separate from his legs and he crawls for 1,000 yards. But the problem is that they know this in the league, and they know that running backs at this stage are a dime a dozen, and that it's not worth them to pay that kind of money for these guys, and there's going to be a standoff. So for me, you milk it for all it's worth. If you get more than a second-round pick for him, or a high second-round pick, or a player commensurate with that, take it. But if you don't, you can still probably play that up next year, and where you can play it up the way that Sigmund likes to talk about when you're looking in dynasty drafts to trade picks, because the sense of urgency is still going to be great later on, especially if he signs with the team and is projected as the starter, or he comes off a great season and everyone's expecting that type of thing to happen. You may end up even with a better deal there.
Well, and this really brings up a broader subject and really a fantastic question. Bloom, I want to throw it to you with the same vein here. And, Matt brings up the second-team running backs. And we've seen it several times. Priest Holmes was with the Ravens before he was a star with the Chiefs. Charlie Garner, I remember years ago. I remember watching him with the Eagles in the late 90s and not looking at the stats and saying, I want to see more of this guy, Charlie Garner. I want to see this guy get an opportunity. He did, and for a brief period with the 49ers, he was a very successful Pro Bowl player, 1,000-yard rusher, etc. So guys like Charlie Garner, Amon Green, we remember. I was thinking about Amon Green earlier today, Bloom, because I was watching Ronnie Hillman try to work as a return man. It's not going to happen. I will say something negative about Ronnie Hillman. He can't be a return man. It's just not natural. And, remembering Amon Green years ago with the Seattle Seahawks, that's how he got on the field. Amon Green was a return man before he ever did anything with the Green Bay Packers. So, we see some of these guys. When is that point, and specifically with Jennings, but with other players, how do you get that feel for a guy? Matt broke it down very well with the Jennings versus MJD thing. Is it a gut thing? Is it, a glimpse thing? It's really a question that we could go 2 hours on and just say, where is that line to either, really believe in the guy? Because you don't want to be holding on to fool's gold. But if you're holding on to that young Charlie Garner, that young Amon Green, that young Priest Holmes, that young Rashad Jennings, that's obviously got some real fantasy value. Bloom, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the way you do this is what we all do, why we love fantasy football. You're watching these guys on unlimited touches. You're listening to what the beat writers tell you. See, it's like whenever we talked to Charlie Bernstein when I was on your show in Denver last month, and he said, yeah, Rashad Jennings can start for other teams. And not just that, but the Jags would be fine with him starting for them, and they're not going to budge in this MJD contract situation. So you put together your intel, your research from the people who are around the teams, and you trust your eyes. You just see it. And age becomes an issue, although you see someone like Fred Jackson emerging, and Fred Jackson, every opportunity he got with Buffalo, he looked good. His pedigree, his age made it seem like, well, they're never going to make him the starter. Well, sometimes guys just force their way into that role because they're so hungry and they're so good that, yeah, you have a guy like Fred Jackson having his breakout season, when he's at an age that, Joseph Adai, 29, and he's quitting. Fred Jackson's older than that. And I think around the league, the guys that fit the bill, and there are some guys that the buzz is already out there. Someone like Quiz Rogers, I know that I'm certainly not alone in that bandwagon. I think that Mike Smith is a member of that bandwagon. But Bernard Scott's a guy we've talked about a lot on this show over the years as someone who's flashed when he's gotten those chances. We'll see about Ronnie Hillman when he gets his chance. I think that it's mainly just watching players in that very limited set, and this is where the preseason comes in, because we're going to watch guys like Ryan Williams and Alex Green and so on. As far as when do you pull the ripcord, I think that you especially at running back, again, running back scarcity, you err on the side of holding these guys once you see something, because two names that come to mind really quickly are Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis, and Peyton Hillis. And we saw them both in 2008. Green Ellis, because of injuries, got in for the New England Patriots. Hillis, because of injuries, got in for the Denver Broncos. And then the next year, you heard nothing from them. And they were dropped in just about every league that I was in. And sometimes I was the one that dropped them because we're so quick to give up. But the reality is that skill, where a guy has proven that he can do it, even in a small sample size, is rare. And I think you give up on that at your own risk. And even doing something like what was suggested in the question, trading them early while there's some temporary value. Now, like Matt was saying, 3 weeks from now, maybe that MJD owner who's staring down the barrel of having to start, Beanie Wells or somebody that they're really not wanting to start is going to then give you a first-round pick for Rashad Jennings. If you can do that, you do that. But otherwise, what you're really trading away is something like 5% or 10% of the value that these guys are going to get if they hit. And if you do the math, you could have 5 or 10 of these type guys on your roster, and only one needs to hit to justify carrying all of them. So when you see the talent is there, or when voices that you trust in the media are saying the talent is there, people around the team believe the talent is there, err on the side of not giving up.
It is the Audible each and every Thursday night. We do a 2-hour live show here on blogtalkradio.com/the Audible. Make sure you check us out on iTunes and get all of our episodes. We've got the preseason watch list debuting next week, starting on Monday. What is the preseason watch list, you may ask? I will answer. It is 32 teams, 32 episodes, and every single skill position player that is worth, spending breath on. We talk about deep dynasty leagues. This is the show for you. Redraft leagues, obviously, we go through it all. We talk about them all. It is the preseason watch list coming up on the Audible, episode set to be released on Monday. So make sure to check that out, as always, at footballguys.com. And, of course, check us out on iTunes. Now, back to the shark pool we go, the message boards at footballguys.com. I hope Jared's okay, because he still hasn't called back in. 347-826-7620. Send me a direct message via the chat room, and or message me via Facebook like Jared did, and let us know that you're on hold. We'll get your call in, 347-826-7620. Dez chimes in, and he says, great show as always. What round, Matt, would you draft Kenny Britt, and this is my son, Marshawn Lynch, in a dynasty startup PPR 12-team draft? Thanks. So looking to begin a league, dynasty startup with a long lens view. Britt's arrest, one thing. Britt's knee surgeries on both knees, another thing. Lynch, hopefully got things corrected now. We'll see what dynasty value is left there. Your thoughts from this type of perspective, not a redraft, not a this year type of perspective, Matt, but the long lens. I think all three of us, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I think all three of us tend to react, and our actions in dynasty leagues have to do with the next 3 years. That's the way that I think about in my hybrid dynasty league. In 3 years, how am I going to beat Frank Schwab in the championship? I look at that type of window. So in that sort of window, what are your thoughts where to take guys like Britt and Lynch?
Well, I'm just going to say right away, if you've read anything I've done or heard me on here week in and week out on Thursdays, you know that I'm not a fan of Kenny Britt. So I'll put that out there right now to make sure that the bias is there. I mean, I tell the story about how Kenny Britt's cousin, I didn't know it was his cousin, asked me at the draft when he was an usher how about if the Titans got the player I wanted. And I said, heck no, I wanted Hakeem Nicks, and they went a pick before with the Giants. They ended up with Kenny Britt, who I do not like. And he was kind enough to be, a classy enough guy to, say, you got to give him a chance. And I said, yeah, okay, that's fine. But watching the game, I just don't really believe that Britt is anything more than, like a Braylon Edwards type of player. He's a massive talent, but he also just doesn't have his head screwed on straight. And I don't trust him to be someone from wire to wire. And there's flashes of it. There's times he looks at it and I think, oh, he's going to turn the corner, and bad luck happens, or other things happen that aren't necessarily bad luck, but under his control, and he let it get out of control. 2 knee issues, all these issues off the field. The Titans trying to, acquire another receiver in Kendall Wright. Certainly would have liked to see them together, and that may still happen. But I look at Britt in his mid-20s, never really quite getting there, and I see a career where, maybe the Titans would be ready to move on in a couple of seasons, and there's a lot of instability there then. I mean, he could end up going easily the route of Roy Williams, Antonio Bryant, who just got signed by the Seahawks tonight at age 31. He could be going the route of, Braylon Edwards. So when I look at that, at the same time, he could end up rebounding and end up being the type of player that everyone's had hope for. But I don't see that. And I think that, to me, round 9, round 10 in a draft is where I would take him, which means that I'm not going to draft him. Marshawn Lynch, on the other hand, I think, still relatively low tread on the tires, because he was a head case with the Buffalo Bills and immature, and he ended up getting it together at least long enough that he could produce well enough for the Seahawks for the past, I'd say, season and a half. And yes, he had a setback with the drunk driving, which is something certainly to be frowned upon if he indeed is convicted of that and did it. It's likely from what you're seeing there that he made this mistake. He's apologizing for it, even though he's saying he's innocent. But looking at all of that in terms of also the type of team leader he's been, the type of producer he's been on the field, if I'm going to look at it just pragmatically from that standpoint, I think he has 2 to 3 years left of being at least a running back 2. I don't believe in Robert Turbin being a clear stud running back, even if Lynch is gone for a series of games this year. I think he's more, at best, a Roy Halou type of back who will show flashes of good skill, but he won't even be able to be an every down back the way Halou was, at least, had some opportunities to be. I just don't think that Turbin has that in him as a pass blocker yet and as a decisive runner between the tackles. So for me, Lynch is someone that can be the backbone of this offense, and I would take the risk on him anywhere between, say, rounds 3 and round 6, is I think where he will be available depending on the league. And I think that you can look at him probably rounds 4 to 5 and get him, and I think that's a value because he's going to be around for a couple more years.
Listeners love or hate when I hack their username. As far as somebody's going to be Mr. Mixelplick, if you're a comic book fan, you know who that guy is, or Super Friends fan. or Alakazoo. I don't know what the names are going to be, but this one, Bloom, you got to help me out here. Lava Aches Beads Man. I don't know. I hope I got it right. Lavash Beadsman. I don't know. But this is where we talk about the Cowboys. No, we don't talk about the Cowboys. We talk about the Washington Redskins. Bloom, what are we to make of Evan Royster taking first-team carries in minicamp? More Shanahanigans, or is this to be taken into consideration, bumping Halou down? If we look at natural talent, and I go back not only to film, but at the Shrine game a couple of years ago in Orlando, Evan Royster's a plotter, okay? Now, in a zone blocking scheme, things change because my man Reuben Drones was a fullback, and he was a 1,000-yard guy with the Denver Broncos in that zone Shanahan system. Orlando Scary, very average as a runner, 1,000-yard back in Shanahan's system. Tatum Bell was a one-trick pony. He was a speed guy. He was a space runner, 1,000-yard back in Shanahan's system. Evan Royster barely picks up his feet when he's runs. Not quite as bad as old scissor legs Anthony Thomas back in the day with the Bears. Not Anthony Thompson from the Cardinals, but Anthony Thomas from Michigan, the little scissor legs who barely would just scrape and drag his feet when he ran. Royster's not quite that, but he is a plodding back. If we look at physical talent, Halou is the best of the Redskins roster, in my personal opinion. Hightower, the best pass blocker, if you will. Evan Royster getting first-team carries, it's opening of training camp. Having witnessed Shanahanigans in person for years, Bloom, this is much ado about nothing, in my opinion. And I wouldn't be sliding Halou that much in fantasy drafts. In fact, he's a nice little value where you can get him. Now, here's the thing. The beginning of the year, week 1, starting running back for the Washington Redskins is going to be very different from the week 8 back or the week 14 back when you're entering your fantasy playoffs. It's going to change. So what's the best way for fantasy owners to approach this? And Bloom, what are your thoughts about the news of Evan Royster taking first-team carries in camp?
Yeah, I think that it's just a sign that Shanahan is going to continue to play those donut games, as Matt put it. You bring the right donuts. Halou, we talked about this on the preseason watch list, and I'll give a little preview of it. Even if Halou's not the nominal starter and Halou's only getting 15 touches a game in this offense, with the effect that Robert Griffin III will have, and again, Lance Zierlein from the sideline view was the first one to really put this in a nice package to say, hey, this is going to be a top 3, top 5 running game. I believe that Roy Halou, I see him falling to the 7th round. I'm pulling the trigger there in the 7th round because of the potential reward. Yes, there's risk there. There's the Shanahan risk that every week we're going to be pulling our hair out. But Halou has the best fit in the system. Halou has the best burst, the best big play profile. Royster fits that. Orlando Scary, Mike Anderson, straight ahead runner, take what's there, tough, hard charger, not that creative, not that nuanced of a runner, but obviously we saw what he could do in that system at the end of the year last year. And then there's Hightower, who Shanahan would not commit to as the starter, after many assumed he would be the starter when he was signed. Is there going to be some patience necessary? Yes. Could this be a situation where we say by week 2 or 3, when Halou only got 8 carries or 10 carries in each game, we're going to say swoop in and make a trade for him, just because even if it's by injury or by Shanahan, someone, Halou probably brings in the one with the sprinkles, no, not with the white icing, but with the pink icing, then that's what's going to make it happen. Halou has that kind of upside. We saw it last year. But just to muddy the water even more, Jason Lockenfor reporting today that the Redskins have had internal talks about running backs, including Cedric Benson and Ryan Grant. My reaction to that was, well, Ryan Grant 3 years ago would have been a good fit in the system. I don't think Cedric Benson is a good fit. Just to make it a little more complicated for us, even Alfred Morris had a good practice today, according to one of our guys there, John Keem, who does great work covering the Redskins. It will remain muddy, but the water, that is. But any of these running backs, Halou in the 7th round, Hightower around the 13th, 14th, Royster after that, maybe not after that, on the heels of this news, they're all worth it, because even if you just get 2 or 3 games as the clear number 1 in this running back system from Hightower or from Royster, that more than makes him worth the pick. And with Helu, if you can just get a stretch with him as the number one like we got last year, that will make a pick of him in the 7th round in a tough year for running backs worth it. So I think just the opposite of fearing Shanahan, you go right into the heart of darkness.
Back to me hand says, I don't like cake donuts. Wanted the glaze, the raised donuts. By the way, you can always tell those least popular donuts when everybody works through that box at the office and all of a sudden there's like the old cake donut there or the coconut donut, and you're like, I love donuts, but not that. And Mike Shanahan would just go back of the hand. We love Mike Shanahan. Running back games, a little frustrating. But Bloom says, into the heart of darkness. Vikes fan 75 says this, Matt. He says, in a PPR league, is Sproles safe enough to be considered a running back one? I have him as a keeper in a 16-team PPR draft and debating going wide receiver at 16-17 instead of a very questionable running back. Sproles is your RB1 in this type of format, and it is 16-team PPR. Matt, what say you?
Oh, I say you take him and you don't look back, because Darren Sproles is the average fantasy fan's candidate as a poster boy for a one-year wonder, and it couldn't be more false than it is. I mean, it's really, you look at him and say he's not the running back size that you're looking for from a feature back. He's not in a true rushing style offense that's going to be pounding the ball. He hasn't proven year after year after year with the stats that he is going to be the guy. And he had just one good year last year. Well, that good year happened to be in a system that's a perfect fit for him. He was a free agent sought out by this team, even though they drafted a first-round guy in Mark Ingram. To me, you look at that scenario and you see the passing offense, you see Drew Brees, you see what Sproles was able to do in flashes at San Diego. And you understand that he's the better fit right now than Mark Ingram, unless this offense changes dramatically with how it's approached to the ground game. And it can happen. And we may be looking at this, 4 months from now and going, well, yeah, I was wrong about this whole Darren Sproles thing. But I'm telling you, I'm drafting him in just about every league where I can get him, in the 2nd round, the 3rd round. His ADP is currently 3.03 according to Fantasy Football Calculator in 12-team leagues. So, yeah, if you can get, to me, I think he's worthwhile as a 2nd-round pick, especially in a 16-team Dynasty League where running back may be a little bit more, have a little bit more urgency at the end of that area, and you might not want to have to wait for him at the beginning of the 2nd round. But if you know your league well enough, you might be able to get him as your second pick as opposed to the end of the 1st round, and still feel good about, still feel confident about that. But I think that when you look at what he does in that system with San Diego, he's a terrific space player. He's underrated between the tackles in a system where they're going to run a lot of draw plays, a lot of delays, and he will be able to operate in that type of scenario, break a tackle, and be able to get big yardage in space. And that's what he does so well. And the PPR, it's gravy at that point. It's actually more than that. It's actually the meat as well in that type of league, and that's going to make him be that extra player. So that makes him that 1st round guy. And to me, you look at the distance between what you're going to get at running back at with that level of production in PPR. With him compared to some of the other players that we're looking at, like a Fred Jackson, who might be a value, Ahmad, Bradshaw, who might be a value, but neither of them are going to get the reception totals that Sproles has, and Sproles is also going to be dangerous, inside that 40-yard line on the, where he breaks a run to the outside and has that 30-yard, 35-yard score, where maybe you almost have to extend the red zone for him and say that his red zone touches are actually at the 25 or 30, as opposed to a lot of guys are getting it inside the 10 or 15-yard line because of his breakaway skill.
He's back. Let's go back to the Taco Bell hotline. Taco Bell, who wants tacos? I nailed it, Bloom. 347-826-7620. Who wants tacos? Jared is back. Jared, my man, good to have you back, and we're glad that after your phone dropped, we're like, uh-oh, I hope Jared's okay. But you're back, brother. What's up, man?
I'm back. You know, cell phones today, if I could have the Zach Morris phone, I would, because Zach Morris never dropped a phone call with that big, bulky phone of his. You know, my question was, I'll get right to the point, is it crazy for me to think that I might be able to go running back with the first 3 picks if it's available? My league is a 12-team, pretty much standard. You start 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers. The flex this year is going to be running back, wide receiver, and tight end. If it's available, is there a scenario where you guys would go in a league like this? And my friends, trust me, they're mouth breathers, okay? This isn't a very intense league. Could I go running back, and who would be like the 3 that you would be targeting for something like that, if it's even viable?
Bloom, what's the best way for him to abuse his friends? Is it RB?
Right, mouth breathers, carpet scrubbers even. Look, this is, and by the way, from a little while back, I think it's Lavach Beedsman from The Broom in the System at David Foster Wallace book, but I'm getting off track here, Jared. Not only do I think it's not crazy in a standard league, I think it's a terrific strategy. I think that there's a couple of names you're looking at in the 3rd round that you want to see there to make it work. Steven Jackson, who we talked about earlier tonight, Fred Jackson, I think is the perfect 3rd running back to target, maybe even Frank Gore. And I think in a non-PPR league especially, you want that 3rd running back, even if you're just starting 2 with a flex, because of running back injury frequency, because of trade value for running backs, and also because this is what you want to do. You want to dictate the draft. You know, nobody is going to think that you're going running back in the 3rd round after you start running back. What is that going to do? If chances are when you went running back, other teams are taking Calvin Johnson, they're taking elite quarterbacks, they're taking Gronkowski and Graham, they're taking Andre Johnson or Roddy White or Julio Jones, and they're thinking, I'm going to get a running back in the 3rd or 4th round, Fred Jackson or Frank Gore, whoever it is you take. That's going to set off even more of a panic. What are you going to do by starting running back? Running back is you're going to create more value, hopefully, at wide receiver, at tight end, at quarterback in the 4th, 5th, 6th rounds. So not only do I like it, I think that is plan A going in.
Hell yeah, well good. That was my plan A. And I have one more thing, because I play this for my buddy who's like my best friend. He's in the league with me. We work together every Friday, so we listen to the Audible Live. We re-listen to it Friday. We're trying to get these guys, these 12 guys, to go free agent auction budget for the in-season instead of inverse order of standings. If you guys could just real quick surmise for them why it's such a superior system, because I've tried for 2 years, and the last 2 years, the vote has missed by 1 vote every year to get passed.
So they just got to sway one guy, Matt Waldman, your best argument, because reverse order, waiver wire, if anybody approaches me with a league, and I limit how many fantasy leagues I'm in, but if there is an approach and if it's a league that I'm interested in, I ask about the waiver wire and they're like, it's reverse order, I'll be like, no thanks, because you've got to have blind bid waivers, Matt, go.
The simplest thing I can tell you, Jared, is this. If everyone in your league wants to look at trying to make the league as much about skill as possible, if the draft is about skill, if about setting your lineup is about skill, yes, luck is going to be a factor, but you're always trying to limit that as much as possible and focus on learning as much about the game and the skills that you need as possible. Why would you do everything that's based on skill, but then have one part of your league where it's just completely a roll of the die? You know, you want to be able to, again, make it a skill element and make that 3rd tier, or maybe that 4th leg of the table there be a solid leg of the table that's your league. And part of that is having the skill of knowing what to bid, how much to bid, and being able to maintain a budget throughout the year so that you're not just giving a guy who loses 3 to 5 games in the first, 6 weeks of the season all the, first pick at these great players, didn't have much of a draft, and now, doesn't matter because now they go on an end-of-season run because they lost.
Heck yeah. Hey, Cleveland's got your back, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, there we go. Jared calling in. Thanks, Jared, for the call. 347-826-7620 is that phone number if you'd like to hit the digits and give us a buzz here. It is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night, blogtalkradio.com/the Audible. It's got to have blind bid waivers, baby. Must have for all of your fantasy leagues. Back to the Shark Pool. Got about a half an hour to go, and we will burn through these questions and give you the answers that you're craving. Now, Bracy Smathers checks in. Another Cleveland guy, yes, Bloom, I believe.
Yes.
Bracy wants to know about the Wallace situation we talked about. In fact, you answered that question a little bit earlier. But he says, what's your take on the situation, and how will you feel it playing out with Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders facing the same situation next year? For me personally, I think Sanders, and again, he's got to stay healthy, but given his health concerns, they could let him walk. I could see that happening. Antonio Brown is a guy that I feel the Steelers would take a hold of and keep around. But your thoughts when considering those two for next year and how it may factor into this Wallace decision?
Well, Antonio Brown has already come out and said that he's going to approach it differently than Wallace. So it's kind of like, we have good cop, bad cop. This is like good wide receiver, bad wide receiver. Antonio Brown is the good wide receiver. And Emmanuel Sanders is also, I think, the team. When Mike Tomlin's talking about Wallace, one of the first things he says, let's not talk about Wallace, let's talk about Sanders. Sanders is here, and Sanders is the one lining up in Wallace's spot. Sanders doesn't have quite the same negotiating position because he's had stress fractures and surgeries on both of his feet. That's the kind of thing that may cause a team to hesitate to commit to him long term. I don't think there's going to be any problem with Brown and Sanders. I think we're learning a little bit about Mike Wallace's makeup, a little bit about what he thinks he deserves versus what he's earned. I don't think, based on Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders, what we know about them, and again, Antonio Brown just comes right out and says it, that he's not going to go the same route as Mike Wallace. Not worried.
Cooley's Angel chimes in next. And I'm just pondering this, Matt. Will he change his username when Cooley's out of the league? The guy, there's still Benson will lead the way, I think, is still kicking around the Shark Pool. But, your guy steps away from the league, you got Clinton Portis in your username, you're probably changing it, I would guess. Let's talk about Cooley's Angels question, though. He says, love the show. Playing devil's advocate. Is the incredible depth at wide receiver this year an illusion? Are we going to look back and realize that some of those mid-round guys like Harvin, Bowe, V-Jacks were landmines? And I'll throw Brandon Lloyd in there, too. Landmines and not relatively safe havens. Thanks, as always. That's from Cooley's Angel. We talk about it a lot, Matt, about the depth at wide receiver, but isn't it an illusion in your eyes? Or will we see these youngsters, in the case of a guy like Harvin, continue to grow and evolve at his position?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and toss Brandon Lloyd right back in your lap because I think that there's no way in Hades that he is a landmine. And I think that and I have him ranked actually as an early round guy. I mean, I would probably even reach for him a little bit more than earlier than some people because I believe that he's going to be an excellent player. But some of the guys you mentioned, I would agree with you that some of these guys could be landmines, but I also think that your perspective there, Cooley's Angels, is, it's kind of slanted by the three guys that you mentioned. They're all going to be solid, but I don't see them as being great upside players. On the other hand, you could look at Denarius Moore, Antonio Brown, possibly Emmanuel Sanders, Randy Moss. You can look at some of these wide receivers. Eric Decker could be in Reggie Wayne. These are all mid-round players who are going after round 6 who could very well be starting for you or starting for fantasy teams and be excellent plays, and you could have your first shot at some of these excellent running backs. Now, to me, there is no one way to win a fantasy league, and that's what makes this this hobby so wonderful, because there are a number of ways to look at it. It's about picking the right players. It's not about picking the right positions at the right times. That can be helpful. It can be part of a structure for you, but when it comes down to it, you still have to pick the talent. Just because you picked 5 running backs in a row, or 3 running backs, in the first 3 rounds, doesn't guarantee that you're going to win it. You got to pick the right 3. So on one end of the spectrum, I don't think those are the right wide receivers to look at and say that there's landmines there. I think some of the guys that I mentioned are probably better for you to look at and say they can present value if you're going to go running back. At the same token, I still believe that an upside-down draft approach can be worthwhile because I look at guys like Rashad Jennings that we're not quite sure what's going to happen with Maurice Jones-Drew, Ryan Williams who's looking decent enough in camp, somebody like, either James Starks or Alex Green could end up coming through there. And when you can pick 5 running backs in a row in the mid-rounds, and then in the late rounds be able to get guys like Quiz Rogers, get guys like Jennings, like I talked about before, you're still going to be able to have a shot at landing probably 2 guys who are going to start for you and still get the pick of the litter at wide receiver. It's just a matter of trusting what you're hearing in camp about some of these guys, pinpointing where they're available and whether they're going to be a good value for you and what you feel safe with. If you know you're good at picking, mid-round running backs and it's worthwhile for you to take that type of a risk, then you go for that. If you're not quite as comfortable with it, but you know that you're good at being able to pick mid-round wide receivers, then you go the opposite route that Bloom is espousing and has good points about. So to me, it's not a one way or the other scenario. It's about what you know about your league and what you know about yourself, most importantly, in terms of how good you are at evaluating a position.
Sexy Rexy chimes in next. He says, great show, guys. Can you address the Lions running back situation and describe where the value may lie or lay? I don't know. Either one. And because he brings up the Lions running back situation, including Javad Best and Mikel LeSure, Bloom, before you answer, I must play this drop because it was inspired by one LeSure back in college in Illinois.
Are they built for speed or for comfort? What'd you do with them? Motorboat? You play the motorboat? You motorboating son of a bitch, you old sailor, you.
And we talk about LeSure, we're not talking about him motorboating a fatty bo batty blunt, or blunts, as the case would be. LeSure is there. Obviously, I still believe in his talent. Bloom, coming back from an Achilles is a more devastating injury than an ankle or a knee, what have you. Best with the concussions, that's always going to linger. It should always be a problem. It looks like even though he could win the quote-unquote starting job, maybe he's best served as that change of pace back. LeSure missing those first 2 games, is he really the answer here? Given his natural talent, we've heard some decent things about his recovery from the Achilles injury, about 12 months away from that now. Your thoughts on fantasy value, where it lies with the Lions running back situation, Bloom?
Well, there's value there for sure. And I think that it should not be overlooked as a place to get somebody to stash away on your roster. Now, we talked about Roy Halou earlier tonight, and Javad Best is going right around the same range of your draft. Javad Best is still not cleared for contact. They hope it'll be Friday. But look, it's more than 9 months later, and Javad Best is still not cleared for contact. How many more clear signs do you need? Yes, Javad Best will be a running back in 1 PPR leagues as long as he's healthy. How long will that be? I mean, it could be a quarter. It could be 4 games. It could be 12 games. I just don't like the risk factor there. Mikel LeSure, as long as you can get in the 11th or 12th round, they wanted him. They went out and got him. Before Best was at the ledge of head injury hell, and they want that hammer, and he can be that hammer. He's not starting camp on the PUP. There was some talk of, is he ever going to truly be 100%? And that's one question we'll talk about with Dr. Gene whenever he comes back from Ireland. But you can get LeSure in the 11th or 12th round. I call him a running back lottery ticket. I like that. And then Kevin Smith, a fine running back lottery ticket even later, 15th, 16th round. And you bring up the 2-game suspension for LeSure, and that's important for the value of Kevin Smith because it means he's going to get on the field in those first 2 games, and he's going to do something. And then the other name we have to remember is Joik Bell. And again, I'll give a hat tip to Matt Waldman for being one of his biggest backers from the get-go. And the thing about this Lions running back situation is the passing game creates so much value for the running back, and we've talked about it year in, year out, but this is one of the most important things. And I know someone in the chat room was just saying waivers trades are just as important as your draft, and it's because of things like this where we see 4th-string, 5th-string running backs, or like to call 0-string running backs that weren't even on the team when the season began, become important fantasy running backs in November and December. And Joik Bell assuming he makes the team as a fourth running back. And with those first three, they better be carrying a fourth running back. As soon as we see Best go down, or LaShore go down, or LaShore fizzle out, or Smith go down, Joique Bell moves up another notch. And if Joique Bell is the starting running back for the Lions, he can get it done. So the important thing is to watch the situation. After the 10th round, I think throwing a pick at LaShore, or after the 13th, 14th at Smith, fine move.
Joique Bell, Wayne State, yeah, Cowboys, baby. I don't know what they are. Saw him at the Senior Bowl, too. There's a drink. That one's for Gebs. Sabretooth chimes in. Please discuss Laurent Robinson. How good is he exactly? Can he put up Reggie Wayne 2011 numbers in that offense this season? We have heard some somewhat positive reports about Blaine Gabbert. We know Gabbert's going to have a long leash this season, Matt. They're not going to pull Chad Henne in there, okay? They're not going to throw him in just to make a point. Gabbert's going to have a long time to struggle, if in fact he does struggle in his sophomore season. Robinson comes over, and it's funny that he comes over from the Cowboys. Funny because I've always called him Alvin Harper. And we remember Alvin Harper years ago, opposite Michael Irvin, pretty damn good. Goes to Tampa Bay, nothing. And you look at Robinson now, benefiting from better coverage when it was Dallas. Obviously, Austin gets hurt. Bryant doesn't elevate his game. Mr. 100-yard game in 2 years doesn't elevate his game. Surprise, surprise. Robinson takes over, gets this little mind meld with Tony Romo. Romo trusts him. But defensively, we didn't really see that adjustment to take Robinson away. You're going to see that as Jacksonville's receiving core is not that inspiring. You're going to see defenses say, okay, we're going to shut down MJD. We're not going to allow Robinson to get open. He's going to be facing better cornerbacks, and thus a player, and certainly a passing game, I'm not targeting at all. And I don't care if it's Gabbert, Robinson, or my man Mike Thomas. I don't care. I don't like any of them this season. Matt, your thoughts on Mr. Robinson?
Well, I think that Laurent Robinson is actually a little bit more of a multidimensional player than Alvin Harper was. But I do agree with you that he was not someone that, faced, tighter coverage down the stretch last year. But when he was with St. Louis, he was with Atlanta, he flashed the type of skills that made you think that there was promise for more, and some of that did come to fruition last year. You got to remember that Reggie Wayne last year had only 75 catches for 960 yards, way down from what his averages had been for the past couple of years, which was 100 catches, maybe somewhere between, his average is about 105 catches for about 1,300 yards and about 8 touchdowns. I don't think you're going to see that kind of production, but I do think 50 to 60 catches, 600 to 800 yards, 4 touchdowns, I think is reasonable to expect from Laurent Robinson. And the reason being is that Jacksonville, especially if MJD is not in there, even with Rashad Jennings playing and if we expect him to play well, that this team, if there's more struggles with Blaine Gabbert, that this team could be playing from behind. And if they're playing from behind with easier coverages that they're going to be dealing with and playing in more garbage time, you're going to see easier coverages for someone like Laurent Robinson and Blaine Gabbert to hit after the game is well in hand for the opponent. That doesn't mean that you're going to be able to rely on him week in and week out. So I would say Laurent Robinson is an end of the draft type of pick that you hope that you can hit on as a flex play and start to see some sort of pattern arising with this Jaguars team to know when to use him. Now, the best case scenario is that Blaine Gabbert confounds everyone who threw him in the trash like they threw in, Troy Aikman and John Elway earlier in their careers, and ends up playing better than people expected. And if that happens, Laurent Robinson could be a beneficiary of that and end up surprising everyone. But you're not going to pick him expecting that type of scenario.
Biggest difference, Aikman and Elway weren't afraid of their own shadow. We'll move on to Ballsy Smurf. That's a hell of a sack. He says, can you give your takes on Donald Brown, both redraft and dynasty leagues? What kind of ceiling do you see? Thanks, guys. Love the show. From Ballsy Smurf. Bloom, we've talked about the running back situation. Chuck Pagano, a new head coach for the Indianapolis Colts, says, I feel that Donald Brown can be a featured guy. There's certainly an opportunity here. Now, DeLon Carter had missed a lot of the offseason, the OTAs, and minicamp because of a thumb injury, and he's back now. And you're hearing the reports now that, well, Brown's going to have competition. Mainly, they're throwing in Vic Ballard. I don't know why, just because it sounds better. I don't know. I don't like Ballard's skill set. He's pretty boring as a runner, as a matter of fact. He's versatile. Yeah, he's big and catching passes, whatever. Not a fan. But DeLon Carter is there. And while I am a fan of DeLon Carter, I think Brown may have such a head start that Carter can't make up for it during, unless he has an amazing training camp. There could be some real nice fantasy value here for Donald Brown. Currently coming off the board is the 30th running back off the board. Bloom, I feel he could outperform that average draft position and move into somewhere in the low 20s. Maybe he finishes the season as the 21st best fantasy running back. But either way, it's value. What are your thoughts on Donald Brown this season, and can he hold off DeLon Carter?
I'm going to go the opposite direction and say I don't like him there. And the problem that I have is that he hasn't showed me at any point in his career that he can hold down a starting job, that he's playing at that level. And, now we're starting to hear a little bit more noise that, well, there will be competition. Vic Ballard, DeLon Carter, Darren Evans is still there. So I would say, Donald Brown is not someone I'm targeting. And you can look at the running backs around him, and right there, right next to him in the ADP right now is Peyton Hillis. I would take Peyton Hillis 2, 3, 4 rounds ahead of Donald Brown. If you take Donald Brown and Peyton Hillis is still on the board, shame on you, all right? Mark Ingram is there. I think that Mark Ingram at least has a stable role, and as long as they feed him at the goal line, if the word comes out today he's 100% healthy. We'll see how true that is. He is someone I would take over Donald Brown. Stephen Ridley comes out and gets all the first-team snaps. I would take a chance on him. I would take a chance on David Wilson because he has the talent I've seen, and we're hearing those rave reviews there, and we're hearing it from more. You're hearing it from players. You're hearing it from more than just a coach that wants to talk him up. So of the running backs that are going in that 30 to 35 range, even as far as the 30 to 40 range where Donald Brown is, 8th, 9th round, there's a lot that I like better. Again, top of that list is Peyton Hillis.
Chicken Soup chimes in next, Matt, and he says, how would you guys suggest players new to formats such as the Fantasy Football Players Championship get their feet wet? Sinking, say, $350 into playing the Football Guys Players Championship is a pretty heavy investment for most people, even if they have played fantasy football for a while, and losing, especially losing in a grand fashion due to unfamiliarity or of how high-stakes drafts differ from other free-to-play sites, can sour a person pretty quickly. You make that investment, and certainly in the FFPC and the Football Guys Players Championship, a lower investment than other high-stakes leagues. You get to play for a big prize, and with the FFPC and with the Football Guys Players Championship, the grand prize is always held in attorney escrow, so you don't have to worry about, suing the league or any delay in payment. You're going to get your payment within days of the end of the season. This is all very good news. But taking that first step and going from a player, let's say you throw in $50 into the kitty, you and your buddies, you throw together this league. It's a smaller donation, if you will, because we know gambling's illegal. But, to take that next step into a high-stakes league, even if it, is the $350 entry fee, and you're unfamiliar with the system, what is the best way, the safest way, and the smartest way, dare I say, Matt Waldman, to enter this type of competition and to really feel like you got the most out of your money? Win or lose, maybe you don't take home the trophy, but you place, or you have fun. And I think that's the one thing we need to get back to with fantasy is, you can have a lot of fun in these high-stakes leagues, specifically like the FFPC and the Football Guys Players Championship.
Let's take it instead of the smartest way, the safest way, any of those things. Let's talk about the wisest way. And you touched upon that, Cecil, which is having fun and what your level of risk you're comfortable with. And this is something that I've actually talked about recently in another related subject, which is really when you look at fantasy football, what is it that you expect? What is going to make you feel like you had a successful year? Is it making the playoffs? Is it feeling the team that your league mates aren't going to laugh at you even if you don't make the playoffs? Is it winning a championship? Is that the only, everything else is failure? And what are you willing to live with? Because really what that is you have to understand what type of failure you're willing to live with when it comes to competing on any level. And I think that when you look at the Football Guys Players Championship and you see what's available out there, you want to know what your level of risk is. For you, it's like, I'm going to have fun just investing that money because to me, it's like the odds of me winning might not be that great, but if I do, I want to win in legendary style. Certainly, I can attest, I got probably the best letter of my fantasy football writing career last year from Ronald Eltonall, who was the winner of the Football Guys Players Championship last year of the $125,000, thanking me for recommending the upside down strategy and telling me that he patterned a lot of his approach with this higher risk strategy. I got to tell you, I didn't have a lot of success with the higher risk strategy, but to me, I was competing against a lot of football guys, didn't have a great year, but the way I looked at it is I wanted to win on a legendary level. To me, it was like, if I don't make the playoffs or I make the playoffs and I'm out one year, it's not a big deal. I want to dominate Sigmund Bloom or Cecil Lammey or Jason Wood. I want them to look at what I did that year and see that I went, 13-0 or something like that. I'd rather go for that than say, oh yeah, I was, 9-3, 9-4, squeaked into the playoffs, won a game or two, whatever. I've been there. I've done that. I want to see what I can do, from the draft standpoint and try and pick a dominant team. And if I lose and fail miserably, so what? Now for you, if you don't feel that way, then obviously you're going to want to go take a conservative approach. Maybe you don't want to spend that much money. You have to be able to put in what you're willing to lose. And that goes not only with money, but with the strategy that you take, and what you're willing to deal with the risk. If you're someone that's, everyone has a different outlook on life, and for you, failure is your league mates laughing at you at draft day for picking, running back, waiting until the 7th round to pick a running back, then obviously that strategy is not going to be for you, even if you win the championship, because you're probably going to be freaking out about it all the way up to that point. Now, if you could care less about winning or getting into the playoffs or winning best record or winning, most points, and the only thing that matters to you is winning the championship, everything else is failure, then you might as well go for, the most aggressive strategy that you can possibly deal with that can yield you a lopsided advantage if it works out.
Sabretooth chimes in next. When does Ronnie Hillman become fantasy relevant, meaning at least running back 30 type number? What are his best strengths and his biggest areas of weakness? Running back 30 numbers, you would expect Ronnie Hillman to begin the season as a backup behind Willis McGahee. That's what I expect, and I'm Hillman's biggest fan, likely. You begin the season as the backup, but you're looking for a few things. First off, pass protection. That is the most important. And if he does not get pass protection down, he will not contribute, period. Mantra for the Denver Broncos, protect Peyton Manning. The other thing you would be looking for is some sort of injury to Willis McGahee. It's, likely to happen at McGahee's advanced age. Certainly he's going to be their battering ram. So you put the number somewhere around the midpoint of the season. And even if you were to look at the downside, you say, well, at least by the fantasy playoffs, Hillman would have that relevance for your fantasy leagues, and a guy that is just waiting in the wings for his opportunity. Out at training camp today, the crispest cuts, the most crisp cuts, I should say, of any Denver Broncos running back. And yes, Moreno was slipping again. Sorry. His biggest strength is that explosion and the burst and the downfield speed. He likes to toy with defenders, and in the open field, he can give them that dead leg, take it away, make guys miss. He has the make-you-miss ability. The creating your own space, something very important I talk about with running backs all the time. He can do that. He can do that with ease, and he can do it inside. And with the hop cuts, what the hop cutting allows him to do The hop cutting allows him to get through arm tackles that people don't think he can get through. People don't think with that type of style you can be an adequate and effective inside runner. The answer is you can. Look at Thurman Thomas years ago. Thurman Thomas is the main comparison. You know, I brought up LaShawn McCoy, more of a, you know, a hop-cutting LaShawn McCoy. But really, Thurman Thomas, it's almost, you know, cut from the same pattern, if you will, because Thomas did the little Thurman hop all the time. Obviously led the league in total yards from scrimmage for several years for the Buffalo Bills back in the day. That's the type of back that Hillman could become. He's not too small. I talked about Charlie Garner earlier. He's bigger than Charlie Garner. You know, he's a big enough back at 200 pounds. You know, plays about 190. He'll probably lose some weight during the season, as all backs do. Hell, Clinton Portis, when he ran for 1,500 yards at the end of the rookie season, was at 185. Don't give me this, he's too small. That's lazy analysis. He's too small. I would like to see a little more decisiveness because sometimes he's looking for the big play. And we all know in the National Football League, sometimes it's best you just take what's there. That means putting your head down, plugging through, getting those 2 yards, whatever. Sometimes he'll lose those 2 yards because he's hop cutting. He's not a dancer. Dancers don't know where they're going. They're just trying to make some moves and thus wasting energy, wasting time. He hop cuts because he's looking for that big play. He's always looking for the cutback lane. And sometimes, you know, in a Thurman Thomas or even Barry Sanders, who, you know, more was a reverses field type of guy, you're looking for that big play when sometimes you should just be, you know, lowering your head and getting those 2 yards. So that's what I'd like to see Hillman do a little bit more. He's not going to be a return man. He's terrible at that. And he's a good quality receiver out of the backfield, as he proved. Brady Hoke went to Michigan to point at things. All Ronnie Hillman did was catch more passes. You know, and Ryan Lindley needed him to because they lost DeMarco Sampson and Vincent Brown to the National Football League. So that's the summary of Ronnie Hillman in my eyes. Bloom will move on. Shane Vereen's chances of being top 24 back this season. And we know it's so messed up there in New England because you've got Danny Woodhead and you've got Stephen Ridley, we talked about earlier. Vereen is the most talented back, the most talented all-around back of anybody on that roster. Tony Fiametta, and I brought this up on Twitter, Tony Fiametta was extremely important to DeMarco Murray, extremely important last season. They got him. Is that a hint? Maybe there's a little bit more rushing coming because when New England was winning Super Bowls, Bloom, they were running the football. Listen, this, you know, this super run and gun, this hyped up greatest show on turf, this is awesome. It's not my style of football. That's why I bag on it. It's awesome, and fans love it. They love the touchdowns. They love the scoring. Bloom, they don't win championships. Will we see a change, especially in the fantasy playoffs, where maybe they're running the ball a little bit more so they can hoist the Lombardi Trophy?
Not with the personnel that they have. I mean, maybe Stephen Ridley, but we've got to remember that Stephen Ridley had some fumble problems. I would say that Stephen Ridley's the guy you draft first. He has the outside best shot at a top 24 running back, but I still don't think it's a great shot. Shane Vereen got a lot more work in the spring because there was a lot more passing going on in the practices, but now I think that they're going to some of the more balanced plays. We're seeing more of Ridley, but I think you have to go back to 2007 for the blueprint here when Brady threw the 50 touchdown passes, and I think that, yes, there's the potential for that. I think there's potential for 6,000 yards, and I mean 6, not 5, 6,000 yards. You can go back to that season, and leading rusher, Lawrence Maroney, 185 carries for 835 yards and 6 touchdowns. Sammy Morris also had 85 for 384 and 3 touchdowns. Heath Evans had 3 touchdowns. Kyle Eckel had a couple of touchdowns. The point is, that's 14 rushing touchdowns. That's nothing to sneeze at. But they were perfectly content to basically end up with about 400 carries split between 5 guys, 2 of which Kevin Faulk was in there too with his 60 or so carries. I think that's what you are probably going to see this year. Stephen Ridley could lead this team in carries and have 200, 900 yards and maybe 6 or 8 touchdowns, which would mean he's a value in the 9th or 10th round where you can get him, but not a top 20, top 15 running back value. I don't see the New England running game being a big part of the offense when you have Gronkowski, Hernandez, Lloyd, and Welker.
Unless Hernandez starts carrying the ball. Like
there you go.
Last year. Yeah, that crafty BB. So crafty. Really, if you're the laundry guy for the Patriots, you're going to pick a sleeveless hoodie out of the laundry bin and wait a second, whose is this? Oh, wait, I'm so glad he put BB on it so I could know. That's just me. Wrapping up the show here, everyone. Thanks for listening as always. Thanks for subscribing to us on iTunes. Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. Follow the show at The Audible. Keep it locked. We love talking about football, and we dig the fact that so many of you enjoy listening to it. So for the great Sigmund Bloom, the fantastic Matt Waldman, I'm Cecil Lammey saying thank you very much for listening. As always, stay tuned, and oh yeah, stay frosty.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.
Fund set up for his medical bills. He was uninsured, so there's a lot of ways you can help out. But just like you said, bringing it back to our community and just community in general, it's one of the great things about football season starting up and training camp starting up isn't just football. And believe me, we'll stick our finger in the light socket and get our buzz off of that tonight. But this community, and I get emails, Twitters, Facebook messages from people, and they're not just about football, not just about your fantasy football teams, and it's fantastic, and I feel like a much richer person to have all of you in my life, and I know we've gone through some stuff together just earlier this year, and I think that, we could all say that, getting into this to hear the sound of our own voices and talk about football, which we love, and we've ended up getting a lot more out of it.
Certainly, and Matt, well, speaking of the Aurora community and just the heart and determination that this city is showing in the events afterwards.
Yeah, certainly, and it's really more of a statement about our country as a whole, and really the world as a whole. When you look at human nature, and one of those positive things about human nature is, you look at the country giving back and trying to do what they can to make things easier for, a situation that there really is no easy answer for. And, one of those things that I would like to highlight is I'm just thankful for the fact that in light of last week, we're talking about all the arrests of players, that there is still, far and wide, the great majority of players in the NFL are really do-gooders, smart guys, mature people, have learned lessons, just like everybody else. And, looking at the news and seeing something from like Doug Farrar on Yahoo writing about Steve Smith donating $100,000 towards the Aurora community for, helping out the victims, that's the kind of news that isn't often publicized as much as you would think. And it's nice to be able to see that kind of thing. So kudos to Steve Smith and the rest of the football players who visited visited the victims, who have helped out with their money and their time and continue to do with causes around this country and around the world.
Well, and arrest rate per capita lower in the NFL than it is in society. So, I always say microcosm of society. Well, actually, football players aren't getting arrested as much. And one thing that we had talked about earlier this week, Matt, is
that's what made him valuable with Eli Manning, because of the fact that he could take a hit and be able to come down with the ball, and they can make plays in the middle of the field and squeeze that ball in there. And that's what separates a lot of players who may not be the high-end, mouth-watering athlete that fans go gaga about, but necessarily aren't going to be the top players. Demaryius Thomas is going to have a fine season this year, and he will probably, in many leagues, outproduce Eric Decker. But I think it's closer than people think, because when you take a look at this very facet of the game, having somebody who has no fear to put the ball into a tight spot and having the trust in the guy to make the play, and that's what Decker offers Peyton Manning.
Well, one of the bigger stories that came across the wires today, Bloom, we don't spend a whole lot of time with defensive football on this podcast. IDP Roundtable is what that's all about. You got to check that out, of course, every week during the regular season right here on the Audible. We're more than just a live show We've got plenty of shows during the season, about 230 last year, something like that, over 2 million downloads. Again, thanks everyone for listening. I did want to get your thoughts because I like Brian Price. I've always liked Brian Price. When he came into the league, injuries and inconsistencies have kept him from playing up to his potential, and coming in after Gerald McCoy. When they got him that season, Brian Price was there. He's a guy now traded to the Chicago Bears, Rod Marinelli. If there's one guy that can make Price work out, it's Rod Marinelli. And Price and Barron going to a little UFC? What's going on? Give us a scoop here. And Bloom, are you as excited about Brian Price in Chicago as I am?
It's a good calculated risk, and you brought up the incident with Mark Barron, and perhaps that might have given a little nudge to Greg Schiano and Mark Dominic, the GM there, to move on from Price. And he's been through so much. He lost 2 brothers. He lost a sister he was so close to. He's adopting his sister's 9- and 7-year-old kids. He had to take time away from the team because it really devastated him. And I can tell you from watching Brian Price, if he's healthy, and he's had a lot of, I think, hip and pelvis problems, but if he's healthy, he can be dominant. Like no offensive lineman has a chance to stop him dominant. And you brought up Rod Marinelli, and if it's just about making your motor run hot, then Rod Marinelli, the coach that you want. If I can get my tongue untwisted there. But the point is, it's a good risk. It's probably, 5th, 6th, 7th round pick. They could use
Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
Oh, yeah, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. That mic is hot, and it's hot times to talk about the National Football League and fantasy football. It's time for the Audible Live every Thursday night. 2 hours of fantastic talk. Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman, talking about the National Football League, and, of course, this little thing we call fantasy football as well. As training camps have kicked off, they are underway, and we are very, very excited to jump right in and to talk about it. Now, before we get to the football, we do, and I sound like Betty White there, the Twitter. Before we get to the football, I've wanted to send out a heartfelt thanks to the many hundreds of emails and tweets and everything that I had received this last week. Of course, last week going to see The Dark Knight Rises for midnight premiere, was not in Aurora, and, the tragedy in Aurora, Colorado, certainly on the hearts and minds of moviegoers, of Batman fans, and of this country. And I will say this, being in this state my entire life, Colorado will rise, and this community, the Aurora community, will rise. The Mile High City will rise from this tragedy, and it shows the great strength and character of the local media who have covered this event and this tragic happening at the Aurora Theater during the midnight premiere for The Dark Knight Rises. So it shows what a great community we've built, because so many, Bloom, I'll throw it to you, and Matt, I want to hear your thoughts as well, having relatives out in Aurora. Bloom, it just shows the great community that we have. This relationship we have with our listeners. We always say thank you. We always say, we love you guys. And it's the truth. And this relationship that we have with listeners really shows through when something like this happens. And, I get a lot of emails and tweets like, hey, are you okay? And, I certainly appreciate the thoughts and concerns. And I appreciate the love and positive energy that has been, put toward the victims and their families and their friends during this tragic time, Bloom.
Yeah, and there are a lot of ways people can show their support for the victims and their families. I know there's a Jessica Redfield scholarship fund. I know one of the victims, Caleb Medley. There's a
football players aren't Neanderthals. Football players, obviously in every occupation, you have a job out there, and I don't care if you're a Fortune 500 company or a landscaper, you work with some idiots, okay? So obviously in the NFL, there's some idiots. But for the most part, we're talking about guys who are educated, sensitive, and really, have the right mindset about things. So we'll continue on from that discussion. It is time for some talk about training camps opening up around the National Football League, and I, for one, am so very excited. Bloom, I'm so excited that I got heat stroke today.
Ooh.
I'm standing out at Dove Valley watching the Denver Broncos practice. But, buddy, I'll be there tomorrow as well. I'm ready.
Ooh. Yeah, stay hydrated, Cease. But, there's a lot. I think a lot of people got a bit of the vapors watching Peyton Manning today. I know the reports have been good, and I also got to bring up, and we're not going to make this a Denver Broncos show, okay? But I did see our old friend Bill Williamson talking about that the Broncos might be giving this young running back, Donnie something. You're going to give him a chance to shine, I hear.
Yeah, Ronnie Hillman going to get that chance to shine. We do have a lot to talk about as it pertains to Peyton Manning and the way that he looked today, which was very good. Talking to Jason Cole today as he was out at training camp, we talked about Manning's deep arm, and really it comes down, and Matt, this is where I want you to jump in, because we talk about a quarterback skill set, and we all watch the footwork, and, by the way, Brock Osweiler's footwork still looks clean, and I'm telling you, Bloom, he looks like a different guy, so we'll see if he keeps that up in the preseason. The point is this, and Matt, I want to hear your thoughts on this, in watching as much film as you do. You look at these quarterbacks. For me, it's how tightly they spin the pass. It's velocity. Velocity is more important than downfield arm strength. Now, he didn't overthrow Demaryius Thomas on a 9 route today, but he did take a few deep shots, not a ton, and he didn't throw that comeback, that 25-yard comeback towards the sideline, especially on the opposite side of the field. That's probably the most difficult throw in football. I'd like to see that. We have not seen that yet, but we did see some 9 routes, some deeper passes, some out routes, plenty of zip, plenty of velocity, and fitting it into tight spaces. One thing that Tim Tebow never did and will likely fail to do in his pro career is throwing into tight windows. And that's why Eric Decker, I always talk about him not getting separation. He worked one-on-one against Champ Bailey today, and Bailey's not the same player that he used to be, but still one of the best in the league, in my opinion, top 10 cornerback. Decker would get a slight little sliver of daylight. Manning fit it in. Manning stuffed that football in. And that's the main difference, because that's a pass where Timmy, if he saw that, which was a question, if he saw it, he wouldn't throw it because he wasn't wide open. Now it makes plays for Bubba Caldwell, who was the star of practice today. Perhaps we're overlooking his role and what could be his role in this offense. But you see Peyton Manning out there. For me, in watching and evaluating young quarterbacks, or old quarterbacks in this case, Matt, I want to see that velocity, because a tighter spun pass will travel better, will have better trajectory. We always talk about the nose of the football needs to be coming down when it comes towards the receiver. Nothing pisses me off more than a pass where the nose of the football's up when it's coming in. You should not see that, college, pro, what have you, although we still see it sometimes. But with Manning, with the proper velocity today, was the positive sign. Not the, 50-yard bomb, Matt. It doesn't show me much. What shows me much is the ability to have the touch on the underneath routes and to spin that sucker tightly.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, Cecil, about the arm strength at this point. Really, when you're taking a look at a player at the quarterback position, one of the things that you should be looking at in addition to velocity is anticipation and hyper-accuracy. And certainly velocity can be a big part of being hyper-accurate. It's a component of it to a certain degree, but anticipation is also that as well, especially on the deep ball, being able to read that. I've talked about it time and time again that Kerry Collins has a terrific arm, or he did during his career, and it was what made him a high-end prospect for a lot of reasons, or among many reasons, but he didn't have a accurate deep ball, and he nearly killed Randy Moss in Oakland because of the fact that he does not have good anticipation on deep throws, and ends up hanging receivers out to dry because they have to wait on the football. Arm strength is overrated in that regard. And this is why when you look at somebody like Eric Decker, who isn't overly fast, but is big enough, physical enough, has good hands, and can take a hit and hang on to the football, that's what makes him valuable. That's what makes Steve Smith, when he was healthy with the Giants,